I was sitting in a hospital waiting room with a compass in my pocket and a phone lighting up in my hand. The man 3 seats away had no idea his whole life was about to change before my daughter finished having her first contraction. He thought I was just an old carpenter killing time until my grandchild was born. He had no idea what I used to do for 20 years before I ever picked up a hammer for a living. He was about to find out in the worst possible room, at the worst possible moment, in front of the one person whose opinion of him actually mattered. My name is Curtis Boone. I'm 64 years old, and for 30 years I built additions and finished basements all over Columbus, Ohio. Before that I served. That's all I ever told my family, and it was true, just not the whole truth. In about 6 minutes, my phone was going to ring. Everything I never talked about was going to matter more than it ever had before. Welcome to my channel. Get settled, because this one is going to take you somewhere. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, you're going to love it here. My name is Curtis Boone. I'm 64 years old, and I've called Columbus, Ohio home my entire life except for the years the Army sent me somewhere else. I enlisted in 1986, right out of high school, and spent 20 years in uniform, the last several in a unit I never talk about by name. When people ask what I did in the service, I say I served. Most people let that be the whole answer. My own family mostly did too. When I came home for good, I picked up a hammer instead of a rifle and built a 30-year career as a carpenter and general contractor. I framed additions on the east side, finished basements on the west side, and built a small crew that worked steady for 3 decades without ever needing to advertise. Word of mouth does most of the work in this town if you show up on time and you don't cut corners. That's the whole trade secret, really. Show up. Don't cut corners. I've carried a small brass compass in my shirt pocket every day since basic training. It was issued to me before my first deployment. I never quite broke the habit of carrying it, even decades after I stopped needing it to find true north in the field. The casing's worn smooth on one edge from 30-some years of my thumb running over it without thinking. It sits on my workbench when I'm not wearing a shirt with a pocket, right next to the tape measure and the pencil stub I never seem to lose. My late wife Rosalind used to tease me about it. A man who spends his whole day squared up with a level doesn't need a compass to find his way around a basement, Curtis, she'd say. She was right, and I kept carrying it anyway. Some habits aren't really about the thing itself. They're about the years it's been sitting in your pocket. Rosalind died 6 years ago. Heart sudden, the kind of loss that doesn't give you time to prepare a single sentence for it. I still make coffee for 2 most mornings out of habit before I catch myself. Our daughter Denise is 31 now, sharp and steady, works in hospital administration over at the same system where she'd eventually give birth. She's the reason I get out of the workshop most weekends instead of just working straight through a Saturday like I used to. She got engaged 8 months ago to a man named Chase Kirby, 29. He sells used cars downtown, and has never once run out of a story to tell at a family dinner. Chase is charming in the particular way that makes some fathers nervous and makes some fathers tell themselves they're being unfair. I told myself I was being unfair for a long time. He's quick, he's likable, and Denise lights up around him in a way I hadn't seen since before Rosalind got sick. He shows up to dinners with flowers. He tells a story that always somehow proves how sharp he is. He laughs loud enough that you laugh along, even when the joke wasn't especially funny. I wanted to be wrong about the quiet unease I felt whenever he talked a little too smoothly about money. It's the kind of smooth that sounds rehearsed if you've spent 30 years listening to subcontractors explain why a job ran over budget. What none of them knew, not Denise, not Chase, not most anyone, was what those 20 years in uniform had actually taught me. It's not the kind of thing that fits into a dinner table story. No matter how many times someone asks. Not just how to carry myself under pressure, though that's part of it. How to build a case slowly and correctly instead of reacting to anything in the moment. How to trust the men I served with, even years later, when I needed something done right and quiet. Denise has heard the phrase, "he served," so many times growing up that it became a kind of family shorthand, a joke almost. She'd roll her eyes and say, "Yeah, Dad, we know you served." Whenever a cousin asked what I did in the army, I never corrected the shorthand. It was easier that way. For most of my life, I never thought I'd need any of that training again in civilian life. I was wrong about that too. A few years back, I co-signed and notarized paperwork for Denise's first apartment lease, back when her credit was thin and mine wasn't. I signed it in her kitchen at her old place, in front of a mobile notary Denise had hired for $20, because it was cheaper than driving downtown. It was a Tuesday afternoon I barely remember now. I remember the notary's stamp was a little crooked on the page. I remember Denise hugging me afterward and saying she'd pay me back for co-signing someday, and I told her she didn't owe me anything for being her father. I want you to remember that signature exists somewhere in a file. It matters later, more than I ever imagined it would when I was signing it as a favor for my daughter. The letter came on a Thursday in a plain window envelope, the kind that never contains good news. It was addressed to me, Curtis Boone, care of a lending company I'd never heard of, marked past due in red block letters across the top. I opened it standing at my own kitchen counter, the same counter Rosalind used to roll pie dough on every Thanksgiving morning while I stayed out of her way. It was a payment default notice. A personal loan, $47,000, taken out 5 months earlier to fund something called Kirby Fleet Solutions. It was a specialty tow truck outfit I vaguely remembered Chase mentioning once at Thanksgiving. Some venture about flatbeds for luxury vehicles that never quite got explained past a sentence or two. My name was listed as co-signer. My signature, or something meant to pass for it, sat on the guarantee line, a little tighter and more careful than I actually write. It looked the way a signature looks when somebody's copying it instead of signing it. I hadn't signed anything. I read the notice twice standing at that counter. Then a third time sitting down at the kitchen table, because a man doesn't want to trust his first reading of a sentence like that, or even his second. I called Chase that evening, calm, the way I call anyone when I want a straight answer instead of a performance. I told him what had arrived at my house. I asked him, plainly, whether he knew anything about it. There was a pause on the line longer than a man gives you when he's confused. I could hear the television on behind him, some sports broadcast, and a chair creak like he'd sat up straighter. Then Chase laughed, short and a little too easy. He said something had gotten mixed up with the paperwork. Nothing to worry about, he'd handle it himself, he just needed a little time to sort out the lender's records. Handle it how? I said. Another pause, longer than the first. It's complicated, Curtis. It's a business thing. You wouldn't really. He stopped himself there, like he'd caught the sentence before it finished, and started over. Look, it's handled. Don't worry about it. My name's on a guarantee I never signed, I said, keeping my voice level. It's the same level I've used my whole life, whether I was talking a nervous apprentice through a difficult cut or talking a man through a bad moment overseas. I'd like to understand how that happened. I could hear something shift in his voice, a kind of ease that only comes from a man who's already decided how this conversation ends. You're just an old man, Curtis. You won't even notice. He said it the way you'd reassure someone about a small thing, a light left on overnight, a magazine subscription that renewed itself. Like it wasn't really worth either of us spending more time on. I want you to sit with that sentence for a second, because I did. Not the forgery yet. I didn't fully understand the shape of that yet, not that night. Just those 9 words, delivered easy, like a joke he expected me to laugh along with, the way you tease an uncle about not knowing how to use a smartphone. I need you to come by tomorrow, I said. Bring whatever paperwork you have. Curtis, it's really not necessary, I've got it, tomorrow, I said, and hung up before he could finish the sentence. I stood there in my kitchen a while longer, phone still in my hand. The refrigerator hummed the way it does at that hour, when the whole house goes quiet around you. He didn't come by tomorrow. He texted an excuse about work, something about a lot full of trucks needing his attention. He didn't come by the day after that either, another excuse, shorter this time, barely a full sentence. I didn't call again, and I didn't text back asking where he was. I want to be honest about something. It would make a better story if I'd been furious standing in that kitchen, if I'd driven straight to his apartment and pounded on the door demanding an explanation. I wasn't, and I didn't. I was doing what 20 years in uniform actually trained a man to do when something doesn't add up in front of him. I was getting quiet, and I was starting to look. The same way I'd once learned to look at a room before I ever stepped into it. I called Ray Delgado that same night, a little after 10. He picked up on the second ring the way he always has, before I'd even finished exhaling the breath I'd been holding since I hung up on Chase. Ray Delgado and I served together for 9 of my 20 years, 3 of them in the same unit. We still don't talk about that work at barbecues, not because it's shameful, just because some things belong to the men who were there and nobody else. He retired 2 years before I did, got his private investigator's license in Ohio not long after. He's spent the years since doing skip tracing and background work for attorneys and a few insurance companies around Columbus. Ray's the kind of man who answers the phone on the second ring no matter what hour it is. Some habits from the service never fully leave a person. He still thinks of me the way you think of a man you once trusted with your life, even 20-some years later. "Send me everything you've got," Ray said. No hello, no small talk. It's exactly how he's always started a serious conversation, whether it was a mission briefing 20 years ago or a phone call at 10 at night now. The notice, anything with an account number on it, and don't call the lender yourself yet. Let me look first. I did. It took him 5 days to get the first real answers. He worked his usual contacts at 2 banks and a document recovery service he trusted from an old case involving a contested estate. He called me back on a Tuesday evening. I could tell from the first 3 words of his voice that whatever he'd found wasn't small. The first layer, the loan was real. $47,000, disbursed 5 months earlier, the funds wired directly into an account tied to Kirby Fleet Solutions within 72 hours of closing. Nearly the entire amount gone within a week, covering overdue payments on 2 flatbed trucks and a warehouse lease. Not a rumor. Not a misunderstanding. An actual loan, actually spent, with my name attached to the guarantee. My house, technically, sat somewhere in the lender's risk calculation whether I'd agreed to that or not. The second layer, my signature on that guarantee line hadn't come from a fresh forgery scrawled in a hurry at a loan office counter. It had been traced carefully, patiently, from the notarized signature on Denise's old apartment lease. The same file I'd signed at her kitchen table years earlier, the one I'd told you to remember. Ray's document recovery contact laid both signatures side by side on his screen during our call and put it plainly. Whoever did this took their time, worked from a clear copy, and had direct access to the original document, not just a photograph of it from across a room. "Curtis," Ray said, his voice dropping the way it used to before a briefing. "I need you to hear the third thing. And I need you to hear all of it before you say anything, all right?" I told him to go ahead. I set my coffee down on the counter and didn't pick it back up for the rest of that call. The loan officer's notes, buried 3 pages deep in the file, showed the account had already been flagged for a refinance application. It had been filed 2 weeks before the default notice ever reached my house. Chase hadn't been scrambling to fix a mistake when I called him that Thursday night. He'd already been quietly working to roll the forged loan into a second, larger one. Cleaner paperwork, no red flags on a fresh application, before the first default notice could ever land on my counter and force his hand. The call where he told me not to worry, he'd handle it himself, that wasn't reassurance. That was a man trying to buy himself 2 more weeks before I found out how deep it actually went. He very nearly got them. If you've ever trusted someone with your name because you loved someone else who loved them, sit with that feeling for a moment. The feeling of learning the trust was never really extended back to you in return. It's a specific kind of quiet that settles into a man's chest. Not rage. Something closer to grief for a version of your daughter's future you'd already started picturing. I didn't confront Chase again. Not yet. I called an old friend from my unit, a man named Walt who now works loss prevention consulting for a chain of regional banks. I just wanted to ask, generally, what a formal forgery case actually requires to hold up in front of a detective. Not out of anger, out of the same instinct that made me double-check a beam load before I ever trusted it to hold a roof over somebody's family. Documentation, he told me. Clean chain of custody, nothing you gathered yourself that a defense attorney could call tampering. A licensed examiner's signature analysis, the kind that's testified before. And patience, Curtis. More than you think you have, because rushing a case like this is how a guilty man walks. I thanked him and hung up. I stood in my kitchen a long while, turning the compass over in my pocket. It's what I do when I need to think something all the way through before I move. The house was quiet the way it's been quiet since Rosalind passed. A quiet I've mostly made peace with, except on nights like that one, when it felt heavier than usual. 20 years of training had taught me plenty about acting fast when a situation demanded it. It had also taught me, just as clearly, when a situation demanded the opposite. When the strongest move available to a man is simply to wait, and watch, and let the other side keep making mistakes they don't know you're counting. If you've been listening for a while, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. It costs you nothing and it means everything to us. Hit the like button while you're at it, and drop your thoughts in the comments. I want you to picture what I was looking at 10 days after that letter arrived. $47,000, borrowed in my name, on a signature that was never mine. Traced patiently from a document I'd signed as a favor for my own daughter, years before any of this began. A future son-in-law already working to bury the forgery under a second, cleaner loan before I ever found the first one. And a daughter 8 months from her wedding, humming along to whatever song was playing whenever I saw her. She still had no idea any of this existed underneath the life she thought she was building. I hadn't raised my voice once through any of it. I hadn't confronted anyone at a dinner table or shown up unannounced at anyone's door demanding answers he didn't deserve to give me on his own terms. That's not weakness, whatever it might look like from the outside to somebody who's never had to wait this long for anything. That's a man doing the only thing that ever actually holds up in the end. Building something true, one careful piece at a time, long before you ever say a single word about it out loud to the person who wronged you. I hired Ray formally the following week, not as a friend doing a favor this time, but as a licensed PI on a signed engagement letter. I wanted everything that came after to hold up cleanly if it ever needed to stand in front of a judge. 6 weeks, start to finish, is what it took to build something worth handing to a detective instead of shouting across a dinner table. Every single one of those weeks I kept working, kept showing up to job sites. I kept living a life that looked, from the outside, exactly like it had looked the month before. Ray brought in a certified document examiner, a woman named Priya Aconcó-Reyes who testified in 3 prior forgery cases in Franklin County. She had a reputation, Ray told me, for being nearly impossible to shake on cross-examination. She compared the guarantee signature against 4 verified samples of mine, including the original lease notarization. She studied pen pressure, letter spacing, the small hesitation marks a hand makes when it's copying something instead of writing from memory. She produced a written opinion, 11 pages long, consistent with tracing, not with an authentic signature produced under normal writing conditions. That report alone took 11 days to finish properly. Ray also pulled the loan officer's full file through a records request, which showed something I hadn't expected. Chase had listed my actual home address as a secondary contact on the account, not a fake one, not a P.O. box, not a friend's apartment he could intercept mail from. At first that looked careless, even sloppy for a man who'd otherwise taken his time tracing a signature. Ray read it differently. He wanted mail to reach you eventually, Ray said on the phone one evening while I stood in my workshop. I was turning a scrap of 2x4 over in my hands, not really working, just needing something to hold. He was betting you wouldn't read it closely, or wouldn't want to make trouble for Denise's sake once you did. That's not a mistake, Curtis. That's a calculated risk. It's the kind of risk a man only takes when he's already decided your love for your daughter is a resource he can spend. I sat with that for a long moment, the 2x4 still in my hand. I turned it over the same way I'd been turning the compass over in my pocket for weeks now. A man doesn't accidentally use his fiancée's father's real address on a forged loan. He calculates that the father's love for his daughter will do the covering up work for him, quietly, without anyone ever having to ask him to explain himself. There was something else Ray told me that week that I hadn't asked for and hadn't expected. Months earlier, Ray had done an unrelated favor for Denise. He'd run a basic background check before she and Chase signed a lease together. It's the kind of thing a cautious old army buddy does without being asked, quietly, never mentioning it to Denise herself. He'd noticed something. A pattern of late payments and a dissolved LLC in Chase's name, some earlier venture that had folded within a year. He mentioned it to me in passing at the time, vaguely, over beers at my kitchen table. I'd let it go, telling myself every young man has a rough patch before he settles down. A folded business at 27 isn't a character flaw, I figured. It's just a bad year. I should have pushed harder back then, Ray said, and I heard something close to guilt in it. That's not a thing I hear from Ray often, not in 20-some years of knowing him. I didn't want to be the guy who ruins an engagement over a credit report. I figured it wasn't my place. I told him he had nothing to apologize for. Hindsight makes prophets out of all of us. Neither of us had any way of knowing, back then, what that dissolved LLC would eventually turn into. 2 named instruments were already sitting in that 6-week folder before either of us fully realized how they connected. The document examiner's 11-page report, dated and signed. And Ray's own months-old, half-forgotten instinct that something about Chase's finances didn't sit right, an instinct neither of us had acted on soon enough. Looking back, I think that instinct had been sitting quietly in both of us the whole time, waiting for a reason to speak up. I kept coming to family dinners through all 6 weeks. I kept my voice level when Chase talked about wedding venues and cake tastings, when he showed Denise a photo of a tuxedo he liked. I kept it level, too, when he asked me, straight-faced, if I'd walk him through hanging drywall sometime because he wanted to learn a real skill from me. I said sure, someday, and meant it in a way that had nothing to do with drywall. Rosalind used to say I had a good poker face for a man who never gambled. For 6 weeks, I found out she was right. I sat across a table from a man who had no idea what was quietly being built against him, 1 week at a time. The dramatic irony cut both ways, and it wasn't easy to sit through. 3 weeks into the 6, Chase actually asked me for money. A temporary bridge, he called it, sitting at my own kitchen table with a cup of coffee I'd made him. $4,000, to cover a wedding deposit while his business sorted itself out. He looked me in the eye the whole time he said it. I told him I'd think about it. I never gave him $1, but I let him believe the door was still open. Ray needed the extra time to finish the report properly, and I needed Chase to keep acting like a man with nothing to hide. The second dramatic irony moment came from Denise herself, over dinner at a restaurant she'd picked because it was where Chase proposed. She was glowing in the particular way a woman glows when she thinks her whole life is finally falling into place. "I know you had your doubts about him, Dad," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "But he's really stepping up lately. He even said he wants to talk to you about something important soon, man to man." I told her I was glad to hear it. I meant part of that. I was glad she was happy, in that moment, at that table. I just already knew, by then, exactly what stepping up had actually looked like from where I was standing for the past several weeks. If you've stayed with me this far, you already know a case like this doesn't build itself in a day, or a week, or even most of 6 of them. There's a kind of steadiness that only comes from having been lost before and found your way back. For 6 weeks, I kept that steadiness to myself. At every dinner table, every phone call, every moment Chase looked me in the eye and asked for more than he deserved. I let the quiet work underneath all of it do what it needed to do. Denise went into labor 3 days after Ray finished the folder, 5 weeks earlier than her due date. Nobody's fault, nobody's plan. Just the kind of timing that makes you believe less in coincidence, and more in a world that doesn't wait politely for people to be ready. Chase called me from the hospital at 11 at night, voice cracking with real fear, and asked me to come. I didn't hesitate for even a second. Whatever else was sitting unfinished between us, my daughter needed her father in that waiting room. I was going to be in it, folder or no folder. I drove across town faster than I should have, the compass in my shirt pocket the only steady thing I could feel the whole way there. Streetlights blurred past in a way that reminded me, oddly, of the drive to the hospital the night Denise herself was born. Ray came too, quietly, at my request, sitting 2 chairs down from me in the waiting room. He held a paper coffee cup he never drank from, just something to hold on to the way I'd held that 2x4 a few weeks earlier. Chase paced near the vending machines, running his hands through his hair, asking a nurse every 20 minutes if there was any news. Denise was somewhere down the hall doing the hardest work of her life. For a long while none of the rest of it, the loan, the forgery, the 6 weeks of quiet work, mattered at all. It just sat there, waiting its turn, the way true things do. A little after 6 that evening my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. Something in me, the same something that used to tell me when a room wasn't right, before I could have told you why, had me answer it. Not let it go to voicemail like I normally would in a waiting room. Mr. Boone, this is Detective Angela Whitfield with the Columbus Police Financial Crimes Unit. I'm calling to let you know the forgery complaint you filed has been formally accepted for investigation. We've reviewed the examiner's report and the loan file your investigator submitted, and we'll be reaching out to the lender and to Mr. Kirby directly within the week. I kept my voice low, even, the way you keep your voice in any waiting room. Understood. Thank you, Detective. One more thing, she said. Given the amount and the documentation trail, this is likely to proceed as a felony forgery referral. I wanted you to hear that from me directly before it moves forward. I appreciate that, I said. 3 words. That was all the room needed from me, and all I had room to give in that particular hour, with everything else happening down the hall. My heart was caught somewhere between 2 entirely different kinds of news. Chase had stopped pacing. He was close enough to have caught more of that call than I'd meant for him to catch. The waiting room wasn't large. Just a row of vinyl chairs, a television bolted to the wall playing the news with the sound off, a vending machine humming in the corner. I watched his face do exactly what a face does when the floor changes shape underneath it. Confusion first, the kind that comes from hearing a stranger's voice say a title like Detective near his own name. Then recognition, slow, like watching a man do arithmetic he didn't want to do. Then something closer to fear than anything I'd seen from him in 8 months of family dinners, cake tastings, and easy laughter. Curtis, he said, quiet, careful, glancing toward the hallway like he was checking whether anyone else had heard. Who was that? Who were you talking to? I put my phone back in my pocket, next to the compass, and looked at him. Not with anger. I didn't have room for anger in that particular hour. Not with my daughter down the hall and my first grandchild about to arrive into the world just a few doors away. I had room for exactly what 20 years taught me to have in a moment like that, steadiness, and nothing more than the situation actually called for. You told me I was just an old man, Curtis, I said, quiet enough that it stayed between the 2 of us. And that I wouldn't even notice. He didn't say anything back. There wasn't anything left to say that would have made either of us feel better standing in that hallway. Ray didn't say a word. He just watched, the way a man watches when he already knows how a thing ends and has the discipline not to say so out loud. The paper coffee cup finally sat down on the chair beside him, forgotten. Denise's nurse came around the corner right then, scrubs still on, tired smile on her face. The baby was here, healthy, 7 pounds even, and Denise was asking for her father. I stood up. I looked at Chase one more time. We'll talk, I said. Not tonight. 3 sentences, total, across the whole exchange, spoken low enough that no one else in that waiting room ever knew a single word of it had happened. I didn't raise my voice once, not for a moment, not even close. Here's where the numbers actually landed. The $47,000 loan is now the subject of a formal Columbus police forgery investigation, with the document examiner's report and the loan file both entered as evidence. The lender has already opened its own internal fraud claim, separate from the criminal side. Chase is facing felony forgery exposure that could follow him for years, regardless of how the criminal case resolves. A record, a background check flag that shows up on every job application and every apartment lease for the rest of his life. Consequences no $4,000 bridge loan could ever have been worth. $47,000 is what Chase forged my name to obtain. A felony record and a fractured engagement is what it actually cost him to try. That's the real price of 9 words spoken too easily on a phone call one Thursday evening. Not the $47,000, everything it took from him to believe, even for a moment, that an old man wouldn't notice. The wedding is postponed, not cancelled. That decision belongs to Denise. I've said my piece to her exactly once, sitting on her couch with Rose asleep in the next room. I let her carry it from there without pushing her one direction or the other. Chase called me 14 times in the 4 days after the hospital. I let most of them go to voicemail while I decided what, if anything, I actually wanted to say to a man mid-investigation. On the 14th, I finally answered, mostly because Denise, exhausted and still healing and holding a newborn, asked me to hear him out for her sake, if not for mine. "I don't know what to say to you," Chase told me, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it, none of the salesman's ease left in it at all. For the first time in 8 months, I believed something he said was actually true. "You don't have to say anything to me right now," I said. "Say it to the detective when she calls again. Say it to Denise, eventually, when she's ready to hear it. I'm not the one you need to make this right with first." My granddaughter is 3 weeks old now. Denise named her Rose, after her grandmother, without me asking her to. When she told me the name over the phone, I had to sit down on the edge of my workbench for a minute before I could answer her. I held Rose in that same hospital, hours after the call from Detective Whitfield, small and warm and entirely unaware of anything that had happened in that waiting room. For a little while none of the rest of it was the loudest thing in the room. It still isn't most days. It's just also true, sitting right alongside the good part. That's the way most true things in a family end up sitting side by side, whether we plan it that way or not. A man who's been lost before knows the difference between confidence and direction. I spent 20 years learning that difference, and it turned out I still needed it, decades after I thought I'd put it away for good. Being underestimated isn't an insult. It's just a head start nobody gave you on purpose. Chase handed me 6 weeks I didn't ask for and didn't waste. The compass still sits in my shirt pocket most days, and on my workbench the rest of the time. Rosalind was right that a carpenter doesn't need one to find his way around a basement. Some things you carry anyway, because they remind you who you were before anyone else needed to know. If you enjoyed this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. I will see you on the next one.